Summit, U.S. Secretary Advisor John Bolton has been back on the scenes, actively making comments regarding North Korea. He's long pursued an all-or-nothing approach, and now Special Representative Stephen Biegun also says that Washington will not accept incremental denuclearization. This comes at a time when questions mount over the North's rebuilding of its key missile launch site. We'll have an expert in the studio later for a detailed analysis. But first, let's turn to Devin Whiting at Arirang's News Center for a look at the day's headlines. Devin.
Hi, Minji. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has arrived in Malaysia, the second leg of his trip through 3 countries in Southeast Asia. There, the president is expected to try and boost bilateral cooperation in technology and in the halal industry, for which Malaysia has a big market. On his first day there, President Moon will be attending an exhibition on Hallyu, meaning the Korean wave, and on halal. After that will be a meeting with Koreans living in the country. The president's plan in Malaysia is to strengthen relations with the country so that they develop closer ties in the high-tech industry and to help Korea enter the halal industry. It seems South Korea is working hard behind the scenes to keep the drive for peace between the 2 Koreas on track, despite last month's disappointing summit in Hanoi. Seoul's top security advisor, Chung Eui-yong, reportedly traveled to China last weekend for a meeting with the country's top diplomat, Yang Jiechi. Sources say the two discussed the North Korea-U.S. summit and possible follow-up measures. Chung was reportedly due to speak on the phone with his U.S. counterpart John Bolton Monday evening, Korea time, but the Blue House hasn't confirmed if the call happened. Bolton had told ABC News that he would be speaking with Chung about the latest satellite pictures showing the regime could be rebuilding its missile launch site. For the first time since the Hanoi summit, North Korea has stated publicly that it's still prepared to denuclearize completely. A regime propaganda outlet, Uri Minjok-kiri, reported Tuesday that North Korea stands firm in its desire to establish new relations with the U.S., to bring peace to the Korean peninsula, and to move toward completely abandoning its nuclear arsenal. The report also implied that the North will keep communicating with the U.S. A separate propaganda outlet, DPRK Today, released the same report. These outlets aren't considered as official as the regime's state-run media, like the Korean Central News Agency or the Nodong Shinmun, but the reports are the first to show what North Korea has been thinking about denuclearization since Hanoi. A new report from the UN suggests North Korea has been trying harder to get around the tough sanctions on it by buying oil through transfers on the high seas and by selling weapons to conflict zones. Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to a report to the UN Security Council by a panel of international experts expected to be issued this week, North Korea has found a chink in the armor of the sanctions placed on the regime. The report says North Korea has been accelerating its imports of petroleum products through illicit ship-to-ship transfers, while stepping up its coal exports. The report also indicates Pyongyang has been illegally exporting small arms to Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Sudan. The UN plans to investigate possible companies and individuals in Asia who have been aiding North Korea by secretly purchasing centrifuges for its uranium enrichment. The report said it's through these transactions that North Korea is able to continue its uranium enrichment process. Despite what seems to be easing tensions between North Korea and the U.S., Pyongyang is maintaining its defense readiness, dispersing missile-related facilities in case of U.S. military action. The report says Pyongyang's Sunan International Airport is reported to be one of the facilities. The Wall Street Journal says the report also includes information that North Korea is involved in cyber attacks and virtual monetary hijacking, targeting foreign financial institutions. The UN report is published twice a year to evaluate the implementation and effectiveness of sanctions against North Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A U.S. State Department official has said there will likely be another summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, although no date has been set. According to Reuters, U.S. Undersecretary of State Andrea Thompson made the comments on Monday at the Carnegie Nuclear Conference. She says President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have been very clear that the two sides remain open to dialogue and that they're working to hold another meeting. But Thompson also said the U.S. will continue its pressure campaign until North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons. South Korea and the United States have wrapped up their new Dong Maeng joint military exercise, a drill made smaller than previous ones to support diplomacy with the North. The computer-simulated command post exercise began last Monday and ended today. In English, Dong Maeng means alliance, and the exercise focuses on defense contingency mechanisms. Earlier this month, Seoul's Defense Minister Chung Kyung-do and acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan decided to end the Allies' long-standing Key Resolve exercise, which was 2 weeks long, and to inaugurate the smaller Dong Maeng exercise in view of ongoing diplomacy with North Korea. In other news, a delegation from the IMF is concerned that South Korea might be raising its minimum wage too quickly. In a meeting Monday with Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi, IMF Korea Chief Tarhan Phesiologyu said Korea needs to strengthen its labor market flexibility. He also said it's important to raise the potential economic growth rate using expansionary fiscal and monetary policies to address a domestic and external economic crisis. South Korea's minimum wage was raised by double-digit percentages this year and last, bringing it up to about $7.40 an hour. South Korea's presidential office, government, and ruling party officials have agreed to set up a national education committee under the presidential office by the end of the year. The committee will be tasked with drawing up 10-year plans for South Korea's education system. It'll consist of 19 members, 5 chosen by the president, 8 by the National Assembly, and 6 by related ministries. They'll serve 3-year terms regardless of a change in government. The National Assembly will submit a related bill to the floor by April with the hope of getting it approved within the first half of this year. Now, President Moon is overseas, but the South Korean cabinet held its regular meeting today. They discussed moving forward with several measures. One, to give a boost to the emerging hydrogen car industry. Also, strengthening the protection of Koreans' personal information in the hands of foreign companies like Google and Facebook. Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
Various bills related to the economy and people's livelihoods were reviewed and deliberated upon on Tuesday at the 10th cabinet meeting presided over by Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun. They included allowing the installation of charging stations for hydrogen vehicles near commercial or residential areas as part of efforts to promote the use of eco-friendly cars. The Prime Minister also expressed his appreciation to the local taxi and private carpooling industries that reached a resolution last week.
It's been the result of communication and concessions by both sides. It will serve as an exemplary precedent for similar cases in the future.
Other agenda items included regulations that'll make it harder for private schools to fire or penalize staff members without reasonable cause, as well as measures to tackle sexual harassment. Also, amendments to strengthen the protection of personal data stored by global IT giants, which have servers overseas, such as Google, Facebook, and Apple, were also discussed. Under proposals, the companies could be fined up to $18,000 if they don't designate a local representative to deal with the matter. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Despite the summit breakdown in Hanoi, Washington's special envoy on North Korea says diplomacy continues with North Korea, but that the U.S. will not accept partial denuclearization. Our Park Hee-jun reports.
U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun says dialogue with Pyongyang is very much alive.
Well, let me start by saying the obvious, that diplomacy is still very much alive. And while we haven't made as much progress in the 6 months as I would have hoped coming in on the first day, we stay closely engaged with our counterparts in North Korea.
Speaking at a nuclear conference hosted by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace on Monday, Biegun said President Trump is open to another meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But putting forward an all-or-nothing approach, he said the U.S. is not going to do denuclearization incrementally. He insisted the North has to remove all its weapons of mass destruction, including its chemical and biological weapons. According to Biegun, President Trump hopes to achieve it before his first term ends in January 2021. When the North finishes the process of complete denuclearization, Biegun said that's when the U.S. will lift the economic sanctions. As for recent reports on new activity at the Dongchangli test sites, Biegun says Washington is closely monitoring the rocket site. He said he did not know whether the North Korean leader would decide to launch another missile, but he reiterated President Trump would be disappointed if Kim were to resume nuclear testing. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
And for more, Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a research fellow from the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So like we heard in the report, U.S. Representative Stephen Biegun says Washington is not going to do denuclearization incrementally, adding that they need a total solution, so putting forward an all-or-nothing approach. Now, he insisted that the North has to remove all its weapons of mass destruction, as well as its chemical and biological weapons. Until now, he had been considered a little bit more flexible than the other negotiators. How should we interpret this?
Well, this is, I think, a little bit of too much of a hardline position making by Steve Biegun and the U.S. government, because so far one of the, I would say, progress being made. One area that North Korea and the United States haven't been able to make progress on was what kind of denuclearization approach the two sides agreed to take. And then it seemed, before Hanoi at least, that the two sides had agreed to take a gradual approach towards denuclearization, which actually creates less stress on either side. But this time, I think the U.S. has come up very strong. It's reverting back to the hardline position that he had back in 2017. But the problem here is that back in 2017, the hardline U.S. position could be justified by the fact that North Korea was engaged in a semi-permanent pattern of provocation. This time, there's no such a thing going on. So it'll be, I think it will be difficult for the U.S. government to push ahead with this stance for the foreseeable future, because there's no counterpart and action coming from the North Korea in this case.
So Biegun's remarks are more or less in line with National Security Advisor John Bolton of what he has been saying all along. And Bolton has been actively making comments regarding North Korea these days. Now, do you see a possible shift in Washington's policy towards North Korea?
Well, there's always been some duality when it comes to U.S. policy towards North Korea. We knew that President Trump was more on the side of dialogue. On the other hand, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, was more on the part of unilateral denuclearization. Let's put it that way. And there's always been this duality, and Bolton's position, the policy position, was always below the surface. This time, after what happened in Hanoi with the breakdown of talks, Bolton's position came out stronger. It doesn't mean that it's a new pattern or like a new approach by the U.S. government. So this is a problem, though. I mean, the only reason why the John Bolton's position of unilateral disarmament of North Korea came forward was because President Trump has decided to prefer that approach over the other, the previous one of gradualist approach towards denuclearization. So it's really up to President Trump to decide whether he will continue with his policy stance or not. And this, I think, is going to cause trouble to U.S. credibility and reputation, because if President Trump changes approach again down the road, then I think it will be very difficult for the international community to rally behind the United States.
So both Bolton and Biegun say the door is still open for dialogue with North Korea, but if it's taking this harder line approach, do you think down the road negotiations with North Korea could get a little bit harder?
Definitely. I think what we are seeing right now is slow reversal of respective policy positions towards what we have seen back in 2017. More of a hardline, more of a standoff, and two sides are making very clear that they are not going to move away from the original position. In North Korea was partial denuclearization, the part of the United States complete denuclearization. So I think this is going to be a problem.
So a North Korean propaganda outlet said Tuesday that Pyongyang remains firmly committed to denuclearization. Now, it also said that the two sides agreed to continue productive dialogues to resolve the issues discussed at the Hanoi summit. Now, it's the first time that the North Korea media has brought this up about complete denuclearization. How do you think the North has completed its analysis of the breakdown of the Hanoi summit?
I think North Korea has also been changing its approach towards negotiating with the United States even before Hanoi. We know for a fact that North Korea wasn't too content with continuing dialogue under the framework of North Korea's complete denuclearization first, and maybe lifting of sanctions down the road. So I think North Korea has been resisting or participating in this kind of framework, but then there's been enough diplomatic incentive, not just from the United States, but also from South Korea, to remain this framework of dialogue. Now that the talk broke down in Hanoi, I think North Korea will have to push. I think North Korea will push again for taking a step-by-step approach towards denuclearization. There's no doubt that North Korea is committed. North Korea says it's committed to complete denuclearization. But what really matters here is how we approach complete denuclearization.
So you think the North Korean leadership has drawn out follow-up measures?
Yeah.
Now, this comes at a time when there have been reports that North Korea could take provocative action following satellite imagery showing repair work at its Dongchangli missile launch site. Now, what do you think the North's intentions are? Well,
this is one way to signal to the United States that first, the Dongchangli missile site, which many consider to be redundant or superfluous to the negotiation because it's already one single facility and probably already been spent out by the North Koreans. There's less use for them. It actually represents some value because North Korea can stage provocation from Dongchangli site, so which increased the value of Dongchangli as a bargaining chip. Second is that North Korea is sending strong signal to Washington that North Korea stopped the provocation back in 2017, but then they can take it up when they left off back then. So this is a way to remind the United States that the President Trump's red line of no further testing cannot be kept if the United States insists on unilateral denuclearization of North Korea.
So on one part, there's imagery showing that there may be repair work going on. On the other hand, it's using its media saying that it's still committed to complete denuclearization. Do you think it's providing some clues as to how things will shape out on the Korean Peninsula?
So it's back to the stage where the two sides are going to argue about what kind of approach they're going to take towards denuclearization. Again, North Korea wants a step-by-step denuclearization, where North Korea's denuclearization step will be matched by economic incentives on the part of the United States. United States is reverted back to the position of North Korea complete denuclearization first, followed by lifting of sanctions. So they are going to fight over this again.
U.S. Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security Andrea Thompson says that a third summit between Kim Jong-un and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump is likely without having set a specific date. Now, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo obviously remain open to dialogue. This is what we've been hearing for the past couple of weeks. But she said, how likely do you think this summit is at this point? And if so, when do you think these talks will get back on track?
Well, you already know the outcome of the Hanoi summit. We know why the talk broke down, and the reasons because North Korea wanted almost a complete lifting of the economic sanctions in exchange for shutting down Yanbian. That's the line that the North Korea is holding on to. It's very clear that there's also a condition for continuing the talks with the United States, including holding the third summit with President Trump. So it's very clear if the U.S. accepts that condition or recognize that that's something negotiable for the United States, then it's possible that we will have a third summit between the two leaders. If that's not the case, that what Steve Biegun said today or yesterday about U.S. current negotiating position, it's unlikely that there will be another summit.
Shifting gears a little bit, according to a report by the UN Security Council by a panel of international experts, they say North Korea may be evading sanctions. The report says that Pyongyang has been accelerating its imports of petroleum products through illicit ship-to-ship transfers, as well as stepping up its coal exports. Now, the UN plans to investigate possible companies or individuals in Asia who have been aiding North Korea by secretly purchasing centrifuges for its uranium enrichment. Do you think this could be a variable in the future talks between Pyongyang and Washington?
It's already a variable, but then we know that President Trump has refrained from announcing stepping up the pressure on North Korea. I mean, it's possible the United States might ramp up more sanctions measures on North Korea, but in order to target, say, for instance, the illegal ship-to-ship transfer of oil, that probably will require another United Nations Security Council resolution. So with China and Russia firmly against the idea of ramping up the economic pressure on North Korea, that seems unlikely. So I think, I mean, sanctions could, I think where the direction of the talks will be headed in the future will be talking about the idea of adding more sanctions, but without really executing the idea.
So this kind of report actually makes it harder for the U.S. to make a move in terms of sanctions relief, though.
Could be. I mean, but then I would say that the U.S. is fully knowledgeable about it, and also these are actually still have to be confirmed by the United Nations panel of experts investigation.
Now, moving over to South Korea, Seoul appears to be working hard behind the scenes to keep up the inter-Korean peace drive and keeping close contact with both Washington and Beijing on the matter. Now, Seoul's top security advisor, Chung Eui-yong, was reportedly due to hold a phone conversation with his U.S. counterpart, John Bolton, on Monday evening. Now, the Blue House has yet to confirm whether the call has happened or not, but can we presume that they discussed the recent satellite imagery?
Well, in addition to other things, I think Seoul has a fundamentally different interpretation of what happened in Hanoi from the United States. I think Washington seems to view what happened in Hanoi as a success, in the sense that the United States made it very clear that they are no longer going to tolerate the partial denuclearization of North Korea. I think Seoul has a different interpretation. I think Seoul saw what happened in Hanoi as a manifestation by North Korea that they are not going to engage in further dialogue unless there's some sort of lifting of sanctions beforehand. So I think there's a fundamental different interpretation, and I think Chung Eui-yong, National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong, is really trying to reconcile these two different interpretations and make that into a more coherent joint policy by the two governments.
So Secretary Chung Eui-yong also reportedly traveled to China last weekend for a meeting with China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi. Sources say the two discussed the Hanoi summit as well as possible follow-up measures. What issues do you think were brought up here?
Well, I think China and South Korea right now have a lot of overlapping interest. They want to make sure that North Korea stays engaged in dialogue. Probably it's a different concern that the United States has. I think South Korea and China are worried that North Korea is starting the initial stage of a disengagement from dialogue that we have already experienced several times in history in the last 2 decades. So I think the tone of the conversation that Chung Eui-yong is going to have with his Chinese counterpart will be different from the conversation that he's going to have with his American counterpart.
So we can see that Seoul is maintaining contact with both Washington and Beijing, but at this point, what sort of role will South Korea be required to play moving forward? Because we're almost now 2 weeks after the breakdown of the summit.
Well, I think South Korea will try to convince Washington to back off from this idea of imposing this unilateral denuclearization on Pyongyang. I think down the road, I think South Korean government will try to convince President Trump especially to essentially soften his stance towards North Korea, make it more flexible. I think that's going to be the task that South Korea has embarked on.
How do you see Seoul's approach in wanting to use inter-Korean cooperation to keep these dialogues going?
It's money to provide incentive for North Korea to stay engaged. I think that's, again, that's a concern that the South Korean government has.
So do you think the North Korea is possibly trying to use as a leverage by repairing its missile launch site?
Well, I think repairing the missile launch site is clearly a signaling move. I don't think North Korea is going to go ahead with actual testing of the missile itself. I think that's going to be a deal breaker for everybody, including South Korea. So I think it's just a signaling action on the part of North Korea. On the other hand, South Korea will try to incentivize North Korea to stay engaged, because we also understand that North Korea needs urgent economic assistance.
When do you think would it be appropriate for possibly South Korea's President Moon Jae-in to have a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think it's really up to Kim Jong-un now. I mean, we know President Moon would like to have a very fast-paced shuttle diplomacy between Seoul and Pyongyang, also the Seoul and Washington. But what's really going on is that Pyongyang and Washington are trying to make clear that they have a very clear line and when it comes to negotiation with each other. So I think President Moon would like to convince Kim to come to Seoul or have a meeting in Panmunjom. But I think Kim is going to wait out and then see some sort of a change of position on the Washington first.
So hopefully we'll be able to see some positive developments. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your insights.
My pleasure.
And that's where we wrap things up today. Join us again tomorrow at the same time, but in the meantime, stay tuned to Arirang News for all the latest updates. Thank you for watching and goodbye.